Welcome to the Summer Language Abroad SLA Grant Info Session. My name is Mary Davis. I am the Assistant Director at the Center for the Study of Languages and Cultures. So thank you guys for joining us today. We're going to go through some of the key info questions that we get pretty commonly, walk through the process from eligibility to the application itself, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well. And if you're watching the recording later, be sure that you get all the way to the end for contact information. If you have any questions, that you can reach out, email us or email me directly, and we are happy to help. I am going to turn my video off so that you can get the full screen without that little box of my face, but this is what my face looks like. So you have a face to the voice. I obviously work at the CSLC, so it's not just the Center for the Study of Languages, it's the Center for the Study of Languages and Cultures. So those two realms are reflected in the objectives of the Summer Language Abroad grant. At its inception, what we wanted to build was a not just accessibility and helping students go and achieve their study abroad and language learning objectives, but to also enhance their cultural awareness and their intercultural competence. From our standpoint, that's what we're hoping you would get out of receiving this grant and then participating in your language study. Okay, so the first thing everybody always asks, right? We're talking about a grant, so they want to know how much money really they're going to get. SLA grants are a maximum of $5,500. So depending on where you study and for how long, that's going to cover most, if not all, of your study abroad costs. Obviously, flights to different parts of the world, that tends to be the key component of somebody's budget that would indicate whether that's going to cover 100% or somewhat less than what they're looking to spend. But regardless, that amount will certainly take a big dent out of the bill. What SLA grants can be used for is your essential travel, so the airfare to get to your destination, ground transportation to and from, let's say, the airport to wherever you're staying. If you need to have a monthly Metro card or something, that's also essential travel. Your housing, so whether that's a homestay fee or a dorm fee, or whatever the accommodations look like for your program, SLA funds can be used for that. Obviously, the actual cost of enrolling in the language classes. So whatever if you're going to a university to study or you're going to a smaller language school, whatever the cost is for your language courses. And you are required by the university to have international or global health insurance. So that is also an essential cost that can be covered by the SLA grant. What it does not cover is things like souvenirs, food, clothing, other, things that essentially, regardless of where you would be studying over the summer, you would in theory have to buy for yourself. And that, I believe, is a more just sort of like a stipulation of how we can use grant funds. We would love very much for you to spend absolutely nothing out of pocket. But the exception to SLA grants not being able to cover your food budget is if you are doing some sort of all-inclusive program. For instance, like a homestay accommodation, that's like a packaged fee that usually will include 1 to 2 meals a day with your host family. So the program charges you that fee as your tuition and accommodation. You cannot remove the food cost from that price. That's fine. But there's no separate budget for food where it's like, okay, well, I think I'm going to spend, $15 a day at the bodega getting a sandwich on my way to class, right? In terms of that $5,500, a lot of our students do get the full amount. But a lot of the awards end up being slightly less than $5,500. Mostly when you submit the application, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, we ask for a tentative itemized budget. So if you're going to a closer destination, and let's say your airfare is not terribly expensive and your stay is a little bit shorter, so your tuition for classes and accommodations isn't that expensive, relative to, let's say, somebody going further away for longer. If your total budget is less than $5,500, then we aim for the maximum of what your total budget was. And part of that is that the grant can't be used for anything outside of those items that we mentioned it being used for. So any extra over that amount wouldn't be within the parameters of grant spending. We do generally award of the entire applicant pool, somewhere around 1/3 of students receive an SLA grant. So it is pretty competitive. And of those that receive the SLA grant, more than half are going to get the maximum amount. So the maximum amount being either the 5,500, or if your total budget was, let's say, 5,000, then you would get the full amount of your budget. When you are filling your application and you're looking at that budgeted line item, we want you to think of realistic costs. So these are going to be reviewed. So if you're traveling, let's say, to a relatively closer destination like Costa Rica to study Spanish, and you budget $5,000 just for your airfare, that's not going to be considered a modest estimation, right? Round trip airfare for our students who studied in Costa Rica last year was somewhere around $900 to $1,100. So it does depend, obviously, on where you're flying out of. We recognize that a lot of you go home to a different state or different part of the country or another country entirely and leave for your SLA program from there. And so flight costs do vary. But what we mean by modest estimations is, not your first class ticket price, but just regular plane ticket, not a last minute ticket price, anything like that. So even if your budget does exceed that 5,500, that is the cap. So if your total budget ends up being, let's say, $6,000, then we would say, okay, well, this person's going to be fully funded. We can give them up to 5,500. And then that's just good for you to anticipate that you will at least probably have to come up with $500 of your own for covering that remaining amount. There have been in the past very, very few rare exceptions, usually during COVID, for programs that, let's say, just cost more because of limited travel restrictions for where students could and couldn't actually travel to during that time. But if you have an extenuating circumstance, it never hurts to ask. The worst thing that you can hear is no, limit to 5,500 rather than, not giving us the full context to see if you would be eligible for potentially a little bit more. I want to break down eligibility into two kind of categories. There's you as the applicant, and if you are eligible, which is what we're going to talk about right now. And then there's if the program that you are pursuing is eligible. So for you, the person applying, you have to have either a major, supplementary major, or minor in either arts and letters or KEO. So it's not like all of them have to be in both, right? You can say be a double major or a major supplementary major in the College of Science, but be minoring in a language in arts and letters, you are still eligible. As long as one of those things is in one of these schools, then you are an eligible student for SLA. You have to have taken the equivalent of 1 year of language study if you're an undergraduate student, 1 year or 2 semesters of the language coursework before you leave. So if you're a freshman and you only have, you're in your first semester right now of language study, but you're not leaving until June of 2024, then you're anticipating registering in that language again in spring 2024, you are still eligible because at the time that you depart for your SLA program, you will have completed 2 semesters. If you're taking a language where they have an intensive, like one of those 1010 courses where it's 2 semesters of language study packed into one, and you're getting your 6 credits of Spanish or Italian or whatever it is, that also counts. So if you haven't started taking your language yet, you're interested in an intensive course, you finish that by the end of spring 2024, you are still an eligible student because you'll have done 2 semesters of language study just in the actual timeline of 1 semester. You have to commit to continuing studying the language upon your return, right? So doesn't mean you have to do a full-blown major in the language or anything, but you have to do at least 1 more semester of language study once you come back to Notre Dame. If you're coupling this with another study abroad, you're going to do your summer language abroad, and then you're going to also be abroad in fall 2024, then it's just the next semester that you're back on campus. You need to plan to put a language class into your schedule for that term. And then any of the language classes that you have taken at the time of your application should have been a GPA of 3.0 or higher. So if you check all those boxes, then you are an eligible student for the SLA grant. In terms of the programs that you pursue, because the SLA grant is not for only specific programs. These are, a language school that you find or a study abroad program that does an intensive language study that you're interested in. The program minimally has to be language focused. So no study abroad where I'm taking economics courses in English. That doesn't count because that's not a language focused program. The program needs to last at least 5 weeks, usually up to 8 weeks. If you want to stay longer, you can, but summer doesn't last that long. So usually that's the upper end. And during your stay there, you should be in the language classroom for 15 to 20 hours per week, right? So that's about 3 hours a day. So if you add it all up, you're doing the minimum of 5 weeks at 15 hours. Oh, my math is wrong there, isn't it? 75 to 120 hours. Usually preference would be given to a longer stay. I think previously was 90 hours. It used to be 6 weeks, but we do have a couple of programs that are only 5 weeks, and we know that's out of your control. But if it's a program that offers, let's say, a 4-week course, a 6-week course, and an 8-week course, we would expect you to choose the 6 or the 8-week. SLA programs are a 1 program, 1 language thing. So you can't meet your total contact hours of the language classroom by saying, I'm going to do 1.5 hours of Spanish in the morning and 1.5 hours of Italian in the afternoon. And that's going to end up being my total 120 hours while I'm abroad. It is doing an intensive study of 1 language. If you choose to pick up another language in your spare time because you're just a linguist at heart, first come talk to me because you're our kind of people. But secondly, like that would be recreational study. The SLA grant itself would only be paying for the tuition program cost of the 1 language. It's the summer language abroad, A being the abroad part, operative word. So it does need to actually be an intensive language program outside of the US. With very few rare exceptions. Again, part of this was came about during COVID with lots of travel restrictions. And then there are other travel restrictions which still exist for certain students. So if you cannot go to your language destination, or if things change between now and your departure time, there are exceptions where you can do intensive study in the US. Or in another area, but the, I guess, general rule is that your program is abroad. And before you apply, you'll look, if you see on the SLA website, each language offered at Notre Dame has an SLA program faculty advisor. This is probably a professor that you've already had in your language coursework. And so you need to meet with that person to discuss your program with them. And see if most of the time they're familiar with the majority of the programs. But these faculty members are the experts in what would be a decent, reputable language program. So if they see any big red flags and they say this is not a good program, it's not a good fit, then we would expect heeding that advice and then pivoting to find a program that does more align with your own linguistic and cultural goals. So at this point, if you're like, okay, I understand what kind of program I'm looking for. I know I'm an eligible student. I'm getting ready to apply. And most of you are here because the application window just opened. And you can go in and click through the application and sort of see what you're looking at and prepare. You have plenty of time. But it is a Qualtrics form. It's going to ask you for just your basic information, your net ID, things like that. Shouldn't take any time at all to fill out. Most of what we're looking at, and the only way really that the blind reviewers get to know you as an applicant, are based on your short answers. So there'll be a couple of questions about your expectations and your motivations for pursuing summer study abroad this year. And you don't have to limit it to 500 words. I wouldn't recommend doing too much more than that. But to get your point across and fully answer the question, if you need some more time or more space, more words, feel free to take it. It won't shut you off. Strongly advise against doing anything less than 250 words. In my experience, that doesn't really paint a very full picture of an applicant's motivations and expectations for their summer plans. There will be a place in the application, I referenced this before, for you to itemize your budget. And this is estimates, modest estimates for your airfare, tuition, accommodations, essential travel like on ground transportation, and your global health insurance. It'll also then ask you to put the information of a faculty member who can fill out the recommendation form for you and speak to your preferably language abilities and motivations. So a faculty member that you know or who knows you pretty well. It does not have to be a language faculty member, especially for our graduate students. Sometimes they choose a different faculty member, but maybe one who understands why this language study fits into your long-term career goals, or your research, or anybody that can really attest to, your academic attitudes and performance, right? So it's only going to ask you for that person's email. Please, 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 please make sure that you type their email correctly, because when you submit your application, it will automatically trigger the recommendation form to go to that person's email. And if you didn't type it correctly, then it goes nowhere. And then your faculty member won't recommend you because they never got the recommendation email, and it becomes very messy very quickly. So once you finish your application, and you can save it and come back to it, Qualtrics will remember anything that you've filled out. Give it a once over, give it a twice over, and just triple, quadruple check that their email is correct. That said, too, because Qualtrics remembers you, you do not have to start multiple applications. When you go back to the SLA application form, it will recognize you through like Okta and automatically load your previous application. You can edit it up until the point that you click submit. So please don't submit multiple applications by going through like incognito windows, because that's just more for us to sift through. And then we won't know which application was like the final one that you wanted to do, or which one to evaluate. So some key dates, right? Obviously, the application is open now. It just opened last week before last, whenever November 1st was, right at midnight, right? So it's open from November 1st through January 31st. It closes at the end of the day on January 31st. So once it turns 12 a.m. and it's officially February 1st, the form will shut off. So don't wait until the last minute. It's fine to wait. Do it during winter break. Do it during January. Don't wait until 9 p.m. on January 31st and risk being cut off, please. After the applications are all through, faculty members have an additional week to finish up their recommendations, just in case you did have to wait until a little bit closer to the deadline for whatever reason, and they'll get a couple of reminders in that week if they have not submitted your recommendation yet. the system will trigger an email to you to let you know when they've submitted their recommendation for you. But if you're not sure, like you met up with that faculty member and they said, yep, I submitted it last week and you never got that, feel free to reach out and we can just verify that we have it. So between February 7th and March 10th-ish, that is when the SLA review committee is reading through all the applications, each application, and you can see the rubric online, what the faculty members are looking for. These are language faculty who are reading applications for not just their own language, but also another. So you'll be double reviewed, and then you will be notified if you were selected for a grant by March 10th. So we like to let you know before you go on spring break in case you need to discuss with your family some of your summer plans and how this is going to work and get their input. Applications that are not reviewed during that time, you shouldn't be able to submit an application after January 31st. So that's kind of a moot point, but if somehow the system did let you submit it, we download all of those applications and then stop checking for new ones after that deadline has passed. So those wouldn't be considered any applications. If your faculty member does not submit your recommendation, then your application is considered incomplete. Like I said, we do send them multiple reminders, but make sure that this is a faculty member who knows to expect the recommendation, that they agree to give you one before you put their name in the form, and somebody that you can and feel comfortable following up with. You know, life happens, faculty members are people too. If they forget, and you can remind them, make sure that they, do get your recommendation in by the faculty deadline, February 7th, so that your application will be considered. So you're notified if you were awarded an SLA grant by March 10th, the beginning of spring break. And we expect you to report back in your award letter. You'll have a link to say, yes, I accept my grant award by the Wednesday after fall break or spring break. So we need to know if you're going to accept the funds or if your plans have changed and you no longer plan to do summer language abroad. Then that's fine. And you just submit the form and you say, no, I don't plan to take the grant money. Thanks anyways. If you do not submit the form, I'll follow up with you once and say, hey, do you want the grant money, or did you forget to submit the form, or are you not taking it? And if you don't respond, then we assume that you will not be accepting the grant money. And then you're not included in the cohort. So please, don't miss those emails. That's a silly reason to not get $5,500. By the end of March, you need to have at least started registering your travel with NDI. So Notre Dame International, for any student who is going on a university-sponsored international trip, whether it's for sports or for study abroad or for any other reason, has to have their travel registered and approved by Notre Dame International. They have a whole global risk management team and everything like that. So they need to know your details. And you need to have started that process, preferably finished it, unless you're going to a high-risk travel area that takes a little bit longer to apply, by the end of March. The really important reason we do this is because we cannot give you the grant money until your travel has been approved by Notre Dame International. And if you're traveling in June, then we want you to buy your plane tickets earlier than, May, because prices are only going to go up. So getting your travel done and approved so that you can then receive your grant and start making those purchases, putting deposits for your program, buying your airfare, because otherwise your budget is going to not be accurate anymore after a certain point, right? And we cannot, unfortunately, I wish we could, but we cannot adjust your grant award after we have given you your grant letter. So let's say your budget was originally $4,500 and we gave you $4,500, right? But then let's say you wait until May to buy your flight, and now flight costs have doubled. And you're like, man, can I adjust my budget because I need an extra $1,000 to buy this plane ticket? No, we can't, unfortunately, because at that point we've already allocated all of the funds, and it just doesn't work that way. So please register your travel with NDI as soon as you are able to, once you accept your award. We will have a pre-departure session for the entire cohort of students that are going to be pursuing SLA programs. We'll meet sometime in April, and you'll be meeting with me. We usually do that on Zoom just for people's convenience, and also because our cohort usually ends up being somewhere around like 65 people, which is kind of hard to put all in one place. So you do need to attend that session. Just short of, terrible emergencies, we schedule them after hours, so you shouldn't have any time conflicts, for classes at least. And then once you are in that cohort, you have you've accepted your award, you're starting or have already finished registering your travel, you're enrolled in a Canvas shell with some pre-departure modules and then modules to complete throughout your program. And that first pre-departure module needs to be done pretty close to the end of the spring semester by April 30th. And a lot of that module is actually going through getting your grant dispersed to you so that those funds are in your account. And it shows you how to do that. And if you encounter certain things that need to be troubleshot, I don't know what the past tense of that is, then you can have that support there. While you are doing your SLA program, keeping in mind everybody travels at different times. Some of you leave as soon as the spring semester finishes up, and you might be back in the US before somebody else even leaves. That's why we have these asynchronous modules that you're to be completing throughout your program. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes per week. If you're doing a 6-week program, it's actually a little less than that. It's like 35 to 40 minutes every week and a half. So it's nothing terribly insane, but it's part of how we make sure that we're doing our due diligence and helping as much as we can facilitate some of the space where you can really deeply kind of unpack some of the cultural awareness and enrichment, and work on your own intercultural goals throughout your program. Because we know you're in the classroom, we know you're working hard. I don't speak all of the languages that you guys are going to go and study, so I can't really help you with learning Russian, for instance, but the modules are meant to at least make sure that you dedicate a half an hour to an hour a week to sit down and kind of reflect on what your experience has been, so that you can get something out of it. Another question that often comes up is, can you get credit for your summer language abroad experience? And the answer to that is, it depends. If you are going to transfer your credits, and I would say about 1/3 of our students that do SLA do end up transferring their credits back to Notre Dame, but you need to finish that process of getting your credits, all of your transfer forms and everything approved before you leave. They don't do it after you come back. You'll work with your language department. They're going to want to see some sort of syllabus, likely. They're going to have some questions. There's a form you need to fill out. The department approves it. The registrar approves it. And then when you return, you provide the transcript. Not all programs are going to be eligible for transferring credit back, and that just depends on what program you pursue. If you're studying at a university abroad and doing their intensive language program, probably maybe that credit does transfer back. If it's a smaller, lesser known language school that's still reputable, maybe they don't have X number of accreditations that Notre Dame, registrar might be looking for to transfer the credit back. So do make sure that you are aware of that process. If you plan to receive credit for your summer language study, that you do that before you leave. That is not part of the SLA program. We do not require that you receive credit for your summer language study. We just care that you go and do the summer language study. So that's kind of outside of my wheelhouse. That said, when you meet and talk with your department, and this is one of those things you can talk to your SLA program faculty advisor about before you submit your application, is what really is the best way if you are interested in transferring credit back to your degree program here. What's the best way to do that? Some programs might just recommend that you take a placement test before you leave and when you come back, so that they can place you into the next level, which wouldn't be the same as getting credit for the courses that you take, but it would move you further along in your language program here. And they can talk with you a little bit more about the nuances of how each language department handles those internal procedures. Just something to keep in mind for now as you're planning ahead. Would you recommend freshmen to apply to this grant, or would it be better if we apply during our sophomore year, because we'd have more experience with the language? So this is something I think too, you can talk to your SLA faculty advisor about. It might depend on the language. If you like, let's say you took the language in high school and you're continuing it here versus, you started with zero knowledge and you're only one semester in. We have plenty of students who do both. I strongly encourage freshmen to apply. We have plenty of freshmen that do SLA, that summer between their freshman and sophomore year. And then I'm not sure if you guys are aware of or have already looked at, we also have the foreign language internship program, right? So then those freshmen can then do a foreign language internship between their sophomore and junior year, right? And now you've got 2 summers abroad, pretty good working language proficiency, a professional experience, and you still have 1 summer left before you graduate to either go abroad again, go to a different country, do an internship in the US. It gives you a little bit more time to decide really what you want to do. So I wouldn't say that there is a general answer of like, yes, freshmen should definitely apply, or no, you should definitely wait. You can get a lot of value even only having 1 year of language study under your belt when you go. You have a pretty good working proficiency in most languages after 1 year of study. And even if you feel like you don't, and you're like, oh, I can only really like order food at restaurants and buy things at the grocery store. That's a really good starting place. And you can see a lot of gains during an immersive experience over the summer. So I would still encourage you to apply, whoever asks that question, or for anybody watching the recording.